Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so delighted that you were able to join us for this insightful and very informative class. But before we go any further, I just want Agnes to go through the list with everyone. And I want to find out if you had any problems with your homework, if you had any problems with any of the information, if you couldn't sign on to something, could sign on to something, if you had any problems. If you do, or if you did, I'd like for you to share those now with us. Well, I guess no one did.
No. Well, for me, it was hard, navigate that Google, whatever that form that you use. I can't do it from my job, so it's like working on two different systems or what have you. So it was a little challenging for me to have to not be able to sit at my desk and do it, but go home and do it, and then don't remember half of the stuff. So, but whatever, the Google Forms. So that was about it. But I mean, I had to work around it and make it happen.
Oh, okay.
Would you prefer me to send you the questions individually, like not on the Google Forms?
That would be helpful because at least I can get it done and then go do the thing, do it, hopefully do better.
Okay. Awesome.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, I hope you guys can hear me because I have it's Felix Rojas from Rojas Reach, Test and Trace, Word of Life. And again, I'm so thankful for being part of this program. I had right now I have a little problem with my Wi-Fi because I'm actually working on a site. I'm at One Forum Plaza in the Bronx. We have a vaccine campaign, and my connection is choppy. It's choppy. I tried to get the syllabus. The last time they told us gonna send all the information via email. I haven't gotten on the homework. I did the homework. I did the homework already. The questionnaire, I filled it out. But I was expecting to get the link for the YouTube videos, not our video, but for other classes. Somebody can correct me if I'm saying it right or wrong.
Don't worry, we understand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I sent you the syllabus, Felix. It's like an attachment. It's not going to be under a link on the email. But if there's any issues, I can try and send you the syllabus in a different form. Maybe that could help.
Well, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Do you think if you got a hard copy, do you want a hard copy? A paper copy?
Yeah, why not? I like to have it.
You like paper copies? Okay. So just email Agnes and the two of you will work it out and she'll send you a paper copy.
I will want to put a positive comment on that syllabus. That thing is really tight, organized. All the links work. That thing is beautiful. Just that on a government computer, I couldn't use the whatever they call that thing, the Google Forms or something. Other than that, this document is like bam.
Well, if I could bless like that, so I could get either written a paper, a hard copy. So please send it back at rosfelix@gmail.com, or I can send my mailing address and get it. So it sounds pretty interesting. So I like to have.
I just want to comment.
I would like to have to take a look.
You might be able to use the Google form in your phone. If you use your phone, the mobile, you might be able to use it there. I don't know.
Okay, we'll try.
Okay. So I thank all of you for the comments, and I know you are really anxious, not anxious, you're really prepared to hear our speakers today. And we have Mr. Pankaj Patel, and he is our clinical research manager here at the Clinical Translational Science Center. He has 10 years of experience in research, coordination, and conducting research, 5 years in management of clinical trial operations at large academic institutions and at pharma. He has supervised federally funded industry and investigator-initiated clinical research projects. In his current role, he oversees the clinical research staff and activities of the clinical research unit here at the CTSC. He is also a liaison of the Trial Innovation Network at the CTSC, and you can ask him questions about that later, which is a collaboration to accelerate multi-center clinical trials at the clinical translational science institutions in the country. So now, without further ado, I will introduce you to Mr. Pankaj Patel. The next voice you hear will be Pankaj.
Thank you, Lula May, for
You're
the warm
welcome.
introduction. Unfortunately, my Zoom is not working properly on my computer, so I had to dial in. Hopefully, everybody can hear me. So, like Lula May said, I work mainly with clinical trials and overseeing clinical trial operations at the CTSC. So today I will give you basically you guys an overview of what clinical trials are and basically the what goes in starting up a clinical trial at an institution like Weill Cornell. So what is a clinical trial? So new tests and treatments aren't offered to the public as soon as they're made. They need to be studied. A clinical trial is a type of research that studies these new tests or treatments that are given to people. Obviously, most of you have probably heard of clinical trials in the past year and a half regarding these COVID vaccine clinical trials. So clinical trials are aimed to study how safe and helpful these tests and treatments are. When found to be safe and helpful, they may become tomorrow's standard of cure. So clinical trials can study many things. They can study drugs that are not yet approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, also known as FDA. They can be clinical trials for new uses of drugs that are already approved. It can be new ways to give drugs, such as going from an infusion to a pill form. So there are various types of clinical trials and for various types of drugs and treatments. A clinical trial is carefully designed study that tests the benefits and risks of a specific treatment or intervention, like I said, of a new drug. So once researchers have completed preclinical testing in labs and rigorous screening methods, the companies that are testing these drugs, they will file for an investigational new drug application, also called the IND application, with the FDA. This application will allow the investigational medicine to be tested in human volunteers in clinical trials. So all clinical trials are led by a principal investigator, who is usually the physician or the doctor, along with a team of other researchers, such as research coordinators, research nurses, research assistants, database assistants, and such. And the FDA requires a multi-phase clinical trials process to be completed before deciding if the medicine under investigation is safe and effective for a broader patient population. So the biggest example that we are all aware of in the past year and a half are the COVID vaccine clinical trials. They had to go through a number of phases before the FDA allowed it to be readily available for everyone. So the number of human volunteers increases in the trial as the treatment moves through these different phases, which is why it takes years and years for a drug to be approved. And we saw the exception, obviously, with the COVID vaccines. So clinical trials have to be carefully designed, reviewed, and completed before they are approved. The principal investigator is the person in charge of the clinical trial. They are the main expert, and they usually know what the clinical trial is about, the drug-to-drug interaction. They take the lead in usually designing the clinical trials or choosing the research team on and who will be part of that team. And like I said, they need to be these trials need to be approved before they can start at academic institutions like Cornell and other institutions in New York City. So most of the trials are run at academic centers like health centers like Weill Cornell and other institutions. There are other companies that are just running clinical trials, and that's all they're responsible for. And then these trials are funded by the sponsors, who are the pharma companies that are developing the new drug. So before all of these clinical trials start at an institution or at a specific clinical trial center, they need to be approved by the IRB. The IRB is the Institutional Review Board, and they are a group of people chosen by the healthcare institution where the patients will be enrolled into the clinical trial. And they usually have a minimum of 5 members that are part of the IRB. So they must have like an expert in medicine who knows the science. And then there's a regular person, a lay person who does not who is just like a normal person not working related in anything to science, basically there to dive into the ethics of clinical trials, or if this trial properly conveys the risks and benefits for those patients. And so there are also individuals that are not from the center specific where the trial will be running. So all of this research before it starts needs to be reviewed by these members. And while Cornell also has an IRB boarded by these individuals from various departments and who are not, so a research or cannot review their own trial. It has to be reviewed from independent board members that do not have any conflict of interest. So there are basically 2 types of IRBs: local IRBs, where a center like at Cornell we have our own IRB that are focused on clinical trials that are going on at the institution. And there are also central IRBs where basically it's an institution just focused on that. That's basically all they do is clinical research review of protocols, and they review protocols not just for one institution. They can review protocols for many institutions in the country, and they're called central IRBs. Like I said, these IRB membership, according to the FDA guidelines, should have at least 5 members with varying backgrounds, 1 member who represents a non-scientific area, 1 member who is not affiliated with the institution or the site, another member who's an expert in science. So the responsibilities of the IRB is, before the site can start the clinical trial, they must review all study-related materials in the initial review to see if this study is necessary or if the study is safe and deals with all these ethical issues before a patient is and it needs to be approved. Once the study is approved, the patients are consented onto these clinical trials. And consenting is also very important in clinical trials. It's probably the most important thing before a patient is on a trial. It's probably the most important thing that an investigator is responsible for, and doing it ethically, where it needs to be an informed decision by the patients that they want to participate in this in their particular clinical trial. So in the end, the investigator is responsible for ensuring all compliance throughout the life cycle, throughout the whole clinical trial, when the study starts all the way until the study closes, and even beyond that sometimes. So, like I said, there are various types of clinical trials, and they are usually in phases. And some of the common terms that you may hear if you are signing up in a clinical trial, like there were a lot of people during the COVID vaccine clinical trials that were signing up to be part of that research for the first time, and some of the common terms that are used in these documents is usually subjects. These are the people who volunteer to partake in these studies. Randomized subjects are randomly assigned to different groups. The group may be the actual the drug, or it may be a placebo. Placebo is a substance which does not contain an active ingredient of the experimental drug, but looks exactly the same. So once they are randomized, and if it's double-blind randomized, neither the researcher nor the subject will know which group they are, and until it's revealed at the end of the study when the data is published. A blinded study is, like I said, a single blinded study is when the subject would not know what they are, which group they are in, but the investigator would know. Double-blinded, neither the investigator nor the subject would know. Single-center studies are usually studies that are carried out at one location. Multi-center studies are studies that are carried out at several locations. It could be different cities, different towns, different countries, different states. It could be a worldwide multi-center clinical trial as well. So, like I mentioned earlier, there are usually 4 phases of clinical trials. Even before those 4 phases is the preclinical research. Excuse me. So preclinical research is not done with people. It assesses the treatment in animals usually to see if what kind of reactions the drug has on animals, and if scientists determine it's safe to move on to humans, that's when these clinical trials start at phase 1. So phase 1 trials usually aim to identify the best dose of a new drug with the fewest side effects. So the drug, it's usually tested in small groups, maybe less than 30 patients in phase 1. Investigators start by giving very low doses of drugs to a few patients. And they higher the doses, or if there are no side effects, then they may continue on to a larger dose. And if it's safe, that goes on to a phase 2 study to further assess the safety if the drug is working. And phase 2 usually is in a larger group of people. Also, this is where the drug is tested for efficacy as well in phase 2 and phase 3. Phase 3 usually involves over 100 patients, 100 or more patients at various institutions. It could be multi-center clinical trial at various institutions. It could be a worldwide phase 3 trial as well. And a phase 4 is usually, it's like a post-marketing or a post-approval type of phase where the drug may be approved by the end of phase 3, but patients may continue into phase 4 just to see the long-term effects of the drug well past approval of the drug. It could be 4 or 5 years down the line, even after a drug has been approved. And this is in several hundreds and thousands of people. So let's say you wanted to join a clinical trial. So if you or you know somebody that wants to join a clinical trial, there are very important questions that one should be asking before you sign, while you're reviewing and before you sign the informed consent form. So what are some questions that you should ask? So let's say your physician approaches you saying, oh, there's this clinical trial going on and you would be a great participant. Some questions that you can ask are, what is the purpose of the study? What kind of tests and treatments does the study involve? What does this treatment do? Has this treatment been used before? Has it been used on other types of disease areas? Will I know if I will be receiving the treatment, or will I be receiving the placebo? Will I have any side effects? What are my choices? What are the benefits and the risk? So these are some of the common questions that you can ask the investigator. And based on the answers you get, you will have the opportunity to make an informed decision if you wanted to participate in the clinical trial. So it's in the past 2 years, or 1.5 years, many of us have heard of what clinical trials are, and you guys may have become familiar with what clinical trials are, and hopefully this session gave you more information on clinical trials. I'm happy to take any questions.
You're free to write your questions in the chat as well.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so multiple, so let's sift through it. Okay, the structure for trials seem aligned with standards, proper protocols, and appropriate involvement with agencies, but just whom do we believe? Whose research? All these advertised lawsuits that I see on television for mesh, hip replacement joints, Zantac, and cancer, the research was done perhaps a decade before, maybe, and the FDA approved the drug. These drugs went through stages, yet there's fault now. And especially since pharmaceutical companies can back some of these studies. At what stage was there a possible error in data collection or interpretation of data that gave misleading or incorrect results? Because I have problems sifting through who to believe. If I read a report, whose report do I believe? Because then years later, we find fault with the product and it's gone through a rigorous testing. Yet there's some glitch that comes back to confound the results to say, a mistake was made, lives were lost, things didn't work out well. Whose research do I believe?
Oh, that's a very good question, and that's a very tough question, because ultimately that decision will be your decision, and clinical trials are data driven. So if there is data that supports these errors happen for this reason, then the first person that you should be asking these questions is probably, if you were participating in that clinical trial, it would be that investigator. Or if not, it would be your first point of contact is usually your doctor, who may have the best answers. But like I said, clinical trials are data driven. So whatever the data says, and if the data is out there for everybody to review, then that would be hard to argue what the data says. If the data says that a few years, that's why these, like I said, like there are post-approval studies years after a trial is complete, just to see, because companies do collect information even after their drug has been approved. They collect information for years and years. If you're on a drug and it has severe side effects, that information, as soon as company finds out, it's published.
So as an example, Johnson & Johnson didn't know that their product, their vaccine causes blood clots. That was not part of the research study. That was not the question asked. That was not to be anticipated.
It's like I said, it's very tough in terms of because clinical trials are not designed to be approved in 1.5 years. Usually, it takes a long time, but because of these circumstances, and the lack of treatment options we had, companies did take less than the usual amount to go over all the data. So even we may not know everything right now about these vaccines. That's why I think recent, as of yesterday or the day before, we saw that the FDA approved only the booster doses for 65 and older and patients with rare immuno disorders, because they don't know the long-lasting effects.
So I'm
of-
expendable. So I'm
Yep.
expendable. At 68, then I'm expendable. That's what you're saying.
No,
That's
no,
what
no.
they're saying. Not what you're saying, but that's what they're saying. 65 and up. what
Hi,
did
this
the
is
test
Jeff.
prove?
Deborah,
Test
let me
prove?
sort of try to answer that question a little bit better than, sort of like a little more detail than Pankaj did. So when you do clinical trials, you're basing your results on what you observe in the study population. So if you look at something like a phase 3 trial made for the COVID ones, there are about 50, 60,000 people. And so the issue you have there is that sometimes you have extremely rare side effects, and that these side effects don't pop up unless you test something in millions of people. So if you take 40,000 people, the chances that them getting blood clot were very, very small, because the blood clots only occurred in about 1 in every something like 5 or 6 million cases. So that's the problem. So yes, you have, when you do clinical studies, it's based on science and based on data, but you can only base conclusions and determine what are the side effects based on what you observe in that study population. And for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it's extremely safe, but when you have millions and millions, and I think their data set was total 6 cases in something like 30-something million doses, there's no way you would have found that in a clinical trial, because we didn't test in a clinical trial on 30 million people. There's no way to do that kind of test. Even 5 million people is not feasible for a clinical trial. So a lot of the time when you see like companies go back and say, hey, this is an FDA approved drug, but we found these new side effects, it's because once you will give it to millions of people, these previously unknown side effects will occur when you give it to enough people. And that's really just probability. It's not definitive proof by any means that the drug caused that particular side effect, but any side effect that's severe is reported as long as somebody who took the drug got that side effect, and there's a chance it was due to that drug. And so that's why
Answer should be, and that's an answer that should be paragraphed and placed for those who doubt research. All these people say, I need to, do my research. I need to do my research. You've just explained it well. You don't test for everything. Out of all these people, how do you know to test just for that until something comes up? So it's plausible, but it still makes decision-making kind of concerning, troubling, but at least that sounds like, wow, that's why you didn't get it. That's why you missed that, because there's just so many people that come through and may not exhibit those symptoms.
Yeah, and because you get side effects that are so rare. I mean, to this day, we're not even sure that it was the J&J vaccine that caused the blood clots. It's something that people who took the vaccine got, but the majority of these women were also on birth control. And birth control is something like 1 in 40,000 people develop these blood clots. So it could have been entirely nothing to do with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine at all, and just been the fact that these women who got these blood clots got it from the birth control they were on. We don't know. And that'll probably be a while before we get enough data. But the thing is, if you have things that are so rare, that's when you take millions and millions of people and it only occurs once, it could just be random chance. It could be completely unrelated. There's just no way for the science to determine, because it's just such a rare occurrence.
Thank you.
I just want to add just one more thing to that. And that's why the post-approval process with clinical trials is so important. That's why when they keep investigating and looking at a product over years, it's very, very important. So therefore, when they see the changes or the nuances, or they give it to more and more people and they're seeing more things, for example, the blood clots that came about in those people who were on birth control pills with the Johnson & Johnson, that gives them more information, more things to look at, more things to be concerned about, more things to check people for going down the road. So this is something that they can look out for. And that is so crucial and so important. That's why the whole process is important, and the continuation of to continue to investigate a product or a medication is super important.
Yeah. And then the other example, Deborah, I briefly like to mention is that there's sometimes when you do clinical research studies, everybody who uses the drug uses it appropriately, so properly the way it was intended. The problem you have is then when what happens if people don't use this appropriately, and that's the big issue we ran into with the opioids. So, so for a lot of that, the big issue would turn out is that after these drugs were prescribed to people, you had people using it above the doses that they tested in the clinical trials because they found that it gave them pleasure. Okay, you gave them a high, so they kept taking it and became addicted. And so that's the other area where clinical trials can miss something, is because once you release something to the general public, people can take it in much higher doses than was ever studied or was ever intended. And then you have severe issues. And that's, the big issue with the opioid crisis is that, it was very easy for people to get these painkillers, these opioid medications. And so they're taking it far in excess of what anybody ever tested.
Yeah.
Okay, I think those were all great questions. I think we should move on to the next presentation. Pankaj,
Oh, wait. I have, before Pankaj leaves, I just want Pankaj to, there's two things that I'd like for him to talk about. I know he mentioned them briefly, but I think when he said the benefit and risk of new drugs, like in preclinical testing, I just want him to define benefits and risk. And I think he talked about IND for new meds. So I would just like for him to speak to those things so everyone will get an understanding of those.
Sure. So I'll start with the second one. The IND is the investigational new drug application. So that's usually when these pharmaceutical companies, when they are once they are ready to move on to human volunteers for clinical trials, they usually submit this application to the FDA to get approval that the FDA reviews the data, the preclinical testing data, once, and then approves this IND, so the testing can start in humans. And in terms of the risks, like we've been talking about, clinical trials have risk. Like any test or treatment, there may be side effects, and there are benefits as well, because right now a drug may be treating some type of disease, but a drug currently in a clinical trial may be doing it faster, or maybe targeting a specific cell or disease that the current approved drug does not. So there are always benefits, but that drug that works better on that specific disease area may have other side effects, adverse events that we may not be aware of yet. So it is a very, very sensitive topic in terms of examining the risks and benefits. But the physician, usually the principal investigator, before anybody signs on for these clinical trials, usually goes over the risks and benefits for the study participants. And the IRB is usually involved in determining and it ensures that clinical trial participants are exposed to minimal risk in relation to any benefits that might result from the research. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you so very much, Pankaj. Thank you. We appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Lulumi.
You're welcome.
I will stop recording now, and Lula, you can start introducing Evan.
Okay, I hope you have a takeaway, a positive takeaway. I hope there's something that you've gotten today from these speakers that you did not have when you came in. And it was something that may be very small, but it's very significant. And you had an aha moment. So I thank God for aha moments. And I hope that you had one today. So I thank you all so very much. And I will see all of you next week. Have a blessed one. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend.